Hello and welcome to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, Real Madrid need a Carvajal replacement and they want Trent Alexander-Arnold. Can Liverpool keep him and who else could Madrid consider? Chelsea's front line is flying, but who should join Palmer and Jackson in attack? And how is that lineup potentially hurting the defence? And Manchester City lose their director of football. How do they follow up one of the greatest building jobs in the game? That's all on today's episode. So we're back for another podcast. I'm Patrick Van Straten and I'm joined by Ravi Ramaneni. It's good to see you as always, Ravi.
Hey, Patrick. How are you? Great to see you too.
I'm very well. We're going to get straight into it today, though I do have questions for you later because you've been working hard since I last saw you. You've been running miles. But today you're going to put the miles in on our show because we're going to jump straight in with Real Madrid. So over the weekend, I'm afraid that your beloved Villarreal lost 2-0 to Real Madrid, and Dani Carvajal left the pitch during that 2-0 victory for Real Madrid with what has now been confirmed, I think, as a triple ligament injury, including the ACL, and that's going to rule him out for the rest of the season. Now, Carvajal is 32 now. By the time he comes back, he's probably going to be closer to his 34th birthday than his 33rd. Real Madrid were always thinking about this slot over the last couple of years. We've seen them linked to a variety of names, but now this seems like they are going to have to do a pretty intense stock take of that position, right, Ravi?
Yeah, for sure. It's two ligaments and a tendon. It's the ACL and the LCL, the lateral cruciate ligament, and popliteus tendon. So anyway, it's going to take roughly 9 to 10 months for the full recovery. Probably we're looking at a year before he starts playing again. One of the issues with like ACLs is something that they have a good read on. Like there's a lot of data, and they've a lot of these things happen too often. And so there is a lot of information. It's unfortunate they happen often, and the only positive side effect is that they know the recovery protocols to a T now, how to do it. But a lot depends on the age of the player and the individual bodies and previous injury history. Even if you assume that these guys are professionals and they will be like 100% committed to their recovery, meaning that doing every protocol. And then there is one little bit, like obviously, as you know, I spoke with someone that I worked with in the past that on the physical side, and he said that, well, a lot of ACLs you don't know until you open up the knee. Like what are the things they need to do? What other things that might have happened in the injury? So like, as much as you have MRIs and X-rays and all that, you still need, once you start the surgery, there might be things that come up that they'll have to make decisions on the fly in terms of what they do, if there's any other damage. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. And then the other part is like whether there is like some damage to the meniscus, which just to give like in a layman definition, it just kind of keeps the friction low between the bones and so it's almost like the tissue that keeps it like that bone on bone doesn't happen, there is not that. But then if it gets damaged, usually they have two options. One is to remove the meniscus, which means that you will have it will be a speedier recovery because it just have to be the ligament. So then your motion, you can start walking and consequently jogging and running sooner. So that means you'll recover faster. But the downside of it is because you don't have meniscus, you'll have problem with your knees will degenerate faster. So usually this decision depends on whether the age of the player. So at 33, probably if there is meniscus damage, the decision probably is, okay, let's remove that so you can come back sooner. But if it was like a younger player, like 21 or 22, they would want to repair the meniscus, which means that the knee will is immobilized for a longer period, means the recovery is longer. So all of that, all of this stuff and much more. I mean, I've just simplified it in 2 minutes, but there's a lot more that we need to know once the surgery. I think it's tomorrow or day after. So but anyway, it's a very serious injury. It's going to be a year. And as you said, when he comes back, he's going to be closer to 34 than 33. And also, Real Madrid, what they've done, I think, is they have added one more year to his contract. His contract was expiring in 25. I bet they probably were already in contract negotiation talks. I mean, knowing a club like Real Madrid is very forward thinking, so they just added a year just to make it simple for everyone, so that he is not tense, or he can make the right decision for his knee, and
Sure.
instead of trying to come back soon. Yeah, so, but that means that now they have to find a solution here. Like, I mean, obviously Lucas Vasquez, he's the backup on the squad that's going to play the next few games, but obviously he can't play every remaining game they have. So they have to now look for, and Real Madrid has been very reluctant to sign like temporary replacements or solutions that are very temporary. Like, so they want to sign, okay, if you're going to replace Carvajal, it's got to be somebody as good as him or even better. And so now the list gets very short, like, of those players that are available. The other challenge they have here is also Carvajal is the leader of the team. He's like an undisputed leader of the team. This team is like, they just lost Toni Kroos.
Yeah.
And then, Modric doesn't start regularly anymore, and I don't think he can start many games for this team. So now you're talking about Courtois being the most senior player. Other than everybody else is fairly young or don't seem like captaincy material from the outside. So they have to replace that also. That need not be this right back position, but that's another thing that they have to think about.
Yeah, they've got Alaba, who will come back from injury, but also he's never been, physically reliable.
Yeah.
You don't know if he'd be. And a bunch of the other midfielders, of course, are so young. I mean, Valverde, I suppose, is maybe the most plausible candidate because he's a bit older and he is a regular player. But they've already been thin at the back, right? That they went through the summer. Nacho left. They missed out on Lenny Yoro, and they obviously decided, as you said, we're not just going to add anybody. So their centre back backups currently are Tchouameni, who's obviously a midfielder, and Jesus Vallejo, who's still there, who people might remember from spells at Eintracht Frankfurt and Wolves. But he's 27. He's not. I mean, I think he was at Granada last season. He is not a Real Madrid player, really. So the biggest rumor, obviously, is that they are trying to get Trent Alexander-Arnold to wind down his contract to join them on a free next summer, which would mean they don't have to pay a fee, but probably they would just take the money they would pay in a fee and move it over to Trent Alexander-Arnold. That's what they did with Mbappe. It's an interesting one because obviously in today's newsletter, Ted was looking through potential Toni Kroos replacements for Real Madrid. I guess Trent, in some ways, and maybe even Kimmich, whose contract also runs out next summer, those sorts of players would maybe kill two birds with one stone, right? They'd be your right back cover and they'd give you some of that exceptional passing.
Yeah, for sure. But I think we discussed this at the time too, is that I like Trent for Real Madrid as a right back, and that can play as an auxiliary midfielder. Within the game, take that role and play at times. But I don't know how much I want him as like he is my backup number 8, or looking him that way, like giving him a more fixed and more determined role, more like a specific role. I'd rather have him pop up there in the games and then cause imbalance for opponents and help the team out. I would always look at him that way rather than him playing more exclusively there.
Okay, so it's I guess what I mean more is he could take some of that burden. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, with Camavinga also being out, and it feels like while they've got incredible wealth in midfield talent, there isn't that game controller, that guy who just kind of runs things. And technically, I guess there's no reason that guy needs to be the deepest midfielder so long as he has access to the same areas of the pitch. And with Trent's passing range and Trent's normal position, he maybe could do that. But I think it's interesting to talk about other candidates here, though, because there's a lot of speculation that Alexander-Arnold is going to make this move, and maybe he will. But of course, it would mean leaving his hometown club where he's been highly successful. Do you have another candidate for this? Because I've been thinking about the fact that we've been talking about this left side bias with Real Madrid.
Mhm.
And it feels like maybe it's also an opportunity to redress that, right?
Yeah, one candidate who actually was a Real Madrid player is Ashraf Hakimi, who is at
Sure.
PSG. He's a natural fit for that position. He's also right age, 25, I think, for a Real Madrid player to come in and be a starter. And he's former player there, went on a big transfer to Inter Milan and then another big transfer to PSG. He's one of the top players in the PSG side. So, and his profile, if you compare to Danny's, it fits pretty well. They're not the same player, but I think Ashraf is actually more progressive, more attacking, and he can add more to the attacking. And to your point about them being left side dominant, I think he could add a lot more from the right side, add a lot more threat from the right side. Physically, I think he's one of the best, the fullback that is there
Yeah.
out there. So I think he's a really good candidate. The only issue there is they've already had this skirmish with PSG with Mbappe for the last 3 years. And now they have to go back, and his contract doesn't end till 26. So that would actually involve a transfer fee they have to pay to PSG.
Mm-hmm.
So those matters might complicate this, but this is a player, in Spain they say he's from the house, es de la casa. So he is a player from there. So I think there's definitely going to be some a lot talked about him and his situation, how they can, if there is a way they can make that work. That would be definitely one. And age wise, both him and Trent, I think roughly similar ages. So what they're getting
Mm-hmm.
is, even if Carvajal comes back probably by September next year and maybe plays a role next season, but I doubt that it will be much more beyond that as a starter. So I think they will naturally take over for him. So that's one I would say is a very strong candidate. Like, if there were no other bells, if there are no other strings attached, I would definitely consider him as one of the strongest candidates for this role.
Yeah, I think he makes a lot of sense. And that problem, of course, is financial, as you say. Normally, if a guy's contract was expiring in 2026, you were trying to sign them in 2025, then you'd have a bit of leverage. But with PSG, because money is like, imaginary to them,
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
have that same leverage. I mean, what interests me when I'm looking at the squad is, and I also think because there's not a great wealth of young right back options worldwide right now who are Real
Mm-hmm.
Madrid, who scream Real Madrid standard, would be to do the centre back at fullback thing that we've seen City do and Arsenal do. It feels like that's a bit easier to recruit. But equally there, I think maybe the better option would be to move Militao across or something and sign another centre back.
Yeah.
So that feels like it would give you some continuity, right?
Yeah, it does. And if I'm not wrong, I think they've also used Kamavinga there in the past.
They've used him
Um,
at left back. I don't know if they've used him at right
Left back.
back.
Yeah. Yeah, as a fullback. So I wonder. So I think that they will. I think, to my point earlier, I think they will go to exhaust those solutions out. I think they don't. They don't want to bring a player that is not what they deem as the Real Madrid quality to be a stopgap. I think that they don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather use somebody inside. So yeah, Militao, I think he played a little bit of right back when he was back in Brazil, and a little more when he was at Porto. But at Real
Mm-hmm.
Madrid, hasn't played much. I think that could be an option. But then I think then you have to think about that on the right side, they probably won't have a lot of attacking kind of depth in terms of, like,
Yeah.
because he's not going to be somebody that's going to overlap or underlap. He's probably going to be more of a stay-at-home type right back, and so that
Yeah.
means, and if they have Ferland Mendy on the left side, I guess it might be like they might have, then they might even get even more left side dominant if they have, like, if they use that option. But that's for sure they will think about it, I think.
To me, it was one of those things where you can kind of squint and see it. So, say you have Alaba back or another left-footed centre back, and you play Camavinga left back, then
Mm-hmm.
and Militao is right back. Then you can imagine Camavinga steps into midfield, the defense flexes into a 3, and then maybe someone like
Three.
the obvious candidate is Valverde, who
Hmm.
goes from, a midfield diamond out to the right wing. I mean, he's the one guy who you kind of think maybe has the legs to do it, and
Yeah,
kind of functionally likes to pull out to the right, but it is still, it turns into one of these
yeah.
like very complicated machines that you've got to kind of engineer. But I mean, if you wanted to do that, I think you could go out and get someone like Yorel Hato, like the young left-sided centre back from Ajax, obviously rated very highly, kind of like Lenny Yoho, extremely athletic, good defender, fantastic passer, playing for pretty terrible Ajax side. He'd be a really interesting candidate for that. But they have been more conventional in what they've looked at in the past. A couple of years ago they were heavily linked to Reece James, and I do think if Reece James is
Hmm.
fully fit, he's maybe the best all-round right back in the world, but he's never fully fit. They were linked with Diogo Dalot, but I don't think he's good
Yeah,
enough for the price Man United would try and extract. So to me, it makes more sense. That Hakimi one, the other guy there I was thinking about is Jeremy Frimpong. Um,
yeah.
Feels a bit more gettable. He's a little bit younger. He's 23 years old, playing in a high possession style, playing for a guy who's extremely demanding in possession. And like Hakimi, his threat is in running and getting into dangerous areas, crazy number of touches in the box and shots and
Hmm.
expected assists and dribbles. He's not a guy who gets on the ball a bit, because the thing is, even if you've got Trent there, he doesn't really solve the width issue, right? Like, he gives you some
No, he does solve
creativity
the
from
risk
there,
issue.
but yeah, he's a passer. He's
Yeah,
not burst into the box.
yeah. And the other one, the other name, this is also we discussed before, and this is more like musical chairs here. If Trent moves here, he moves there type of thing, is like Luciano Gertruida, the
Yeah.
player at Feyenoord, who we thought that may be the choice that Liverpool will go with if Trent moves on. And that
Hmm.
player would fit this role as well. Like, if Trent moves, let's say Trent stays at Liverpool, which probably is most likely, I think we can assume, as from an assumption perspective. And then he may be another option there. Again,
Hmm.
he's more in the mold of Trent, as we discussed at the time. So maybe width-wise, it could be still be an issue, but he's definitely very productive and provides a lot of attacking quality.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, well, it feels like there are some interesting options for Real Madrid, but it also kind of feels like they'll look at internal solutions, then they'll go for Trent. If they strike out on all of that stuff, then we might get something a bit more exciting, right?
Yeah, and I would add one option that I don't think Ted discussed in his Crucify article today,
Hmm.
is what if they convince him to come back for this season, or if they convince Tony Kroos to come back? Because
Oh, sure.
looking at how the team is, I mean, he didn't retire because his legs were falling off, right? I think he just retired because he didn't want to. He's like, okay, I'm done. And
Mm.
maybe they can convince him after all this and say, hey, come back, let's do one more time. And that would solve a lot of problems, I think, for them. Because right now, don't forget, like with all this, they still have to figure out Mbappe, Vinicius, that
Yeah.
stuff up front is still not fully solved. I think that they still, I mean, it, so adding this to, like earlier, you're talking about how you can squint and see maybe Militao playing there, but now
Mm.
you're adding all this kind of uncertainty and disturbance to already existing uncertainty up front. If everything up front was, the
Yeah.
front four was settled and everything was locked and ready to go, then you could deal with some of the chaos at the back. But if you adding this to that and that's not solved, you add another problem to it, then it might become difficult against the top sides. So maybe they may be trying to get him back. I have no inside information. This is just me,
Mm.
um, you know, putting it out there.
No, that's interesting. Like when Ferguson convinced Paul Scholes to come out of retirement for that one season when they were really thin. But I know what you're saying. I mean, I think I've brought this up before, but Arsene Wenger always used to talk about this. When he said when there's instability in one position on the pitch, it's very
Mhm.
tempting to start moving things around. But before you know it, you've destabilized 3 or 4 positions on the pitch in an attempt to solve
Exactly.
one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Tony Kroos come out of retirement. Maybe that'll fix it. everything that, annoyingly, they'd probably win the Champions League. Shall we move on then to another team who have... Okay, well, Chelsea fans have been debating this last week who should be in their attack, because obviously Jackson, Palmer, at this point they've nailed down those places, thoroughly deserve them. But the question of who else gets into their front line is kind of an open one. Noni Madueke has 4 goal involvements so far this season in about 590s. Joao Felix has only played a game and a half. Neto has a couple of games under his belt. But there's an absolute ton of guys there, all demanding minutes. Who could have foreseen this? And it seems a little bit unclear to Maresca and to everybody else who should make it into that starting 11. Ravi, what's your take on this before we get into some downstream questions that I'm also interested about?
I think that the hard problem here is that any of these combinations, okay, let's say Jackson and Palmer are fixed, right? If you take those two as fixed, and then you could put, off the names you reeled out, you could put any other two, and you probably win 30-40% of the games. Like, because of the overall quality, you probably win a lot of games. And so that doesn't really give you any real information. You can't just look at, well, we could still win with so-and-so along with those, Palmer and Jackson. The issue is, like, when you play a tough side and, or an away fixture against a tough team, and then what is the best combination, or what is your best team? I don't think they know what is their best team yet, or at least even to divide it into best front 4. So I think one of the things we've talked about before also is a press. How good a team press is will determine how easy you'll make the game for the lines behind them. So if you press predictably and press consistently, whether it's a low block or a high block or a mid block, like whatever it is, if you can do it consistently, then that makes the job easier for the guys behind you. And if you look at, like, the last few starting lineups Chelsea had, was Jackson, Madueke, Palmer, and Sancho. Of the 4, if you just look at their out of possession pressing type numbers, only Jackson is very good, and he's very good at it. For number 9, he's like 95th percentile in terms of pressures and just generally, like, out of possession stuff. The other 3 are range from mediocre to poor. So now you're looking at, of the front 4, only one of them is good, and the other 3 are not that good or not showing up that well. I think some of them could do a little bit more. Maybe Madueke and could do a little bit more. I don't know much about Sancho. I don't expect him someone that can really do more in that area. I think he'll be very creative. And Palmer is the one is the most creative of all of them. So that's the one where I would be okay if he's not the best presser, because I can take that chance with one player, because he's going to give me so much more in the other phases of the game. So you need to have 3 good, like, out of the 4, you need to have 3 players that are good at pressing, and a good, that way you can have an organized press instead of one guy running and trying to, and the others not following him and creating huge gaps, and teams will play through. So that's how I would look at it, and say, like, that they're the best lineup, what looked like their best lineup in the past few games. If that looks like only Jackson is very good at it, everybody else is about average or less.
Yeah, so this is the thing. I feel like a lot of Chelsea fans have been talking about, they think Madueke is maybe a little bit selfish, and he has been kind of a 4-shot-a-game player early on this season. But by passes per defensive action, I think they're the 14th most aggressive side in the Premier League. I was looking at opposition deep completions. So I think in this definition is opposition passes completed within 20 meters of goal, and they're 12th in the league for that. So they're below Everton and Manchester United by that metric. This feels like you're going to give up danger doing that. And I wanted to know, is this a disadvantage of signing the best players from smaller sides? Because I think about Pulisic going to Chelsea years ago, and I remember at the time reading some article saying, well, he's coming from Dortmund. Dortmund, they always press very aggressively, and the same thing happened, I think, when Arsenal signed Aubameyang, and I thought, yeah, Dortmund do tend to press aggressively, but I'm not sure those two guys are the guys who are really making that press happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very good question. And also, if you think about it, basically, I made a case for Cole Palmer I'm being okay with Cole Palmer pressing not up to the mark just because he's the most creative player they have. So to extend that logic, if you get 4 of these from 4 different teams where he is the player that they give him the most freedom, then you're talking about 4 guys. Like, of these 4, who is going to press? Like, you want at least 3 of them to be good at doing out of possession work. So yeah, I think that's a really good insight. Like, when you and teams do this when they're doing recruitment, is who are the players playing around him? What are the profiles of the players around him, to see, do we have the same profiles here, or are we asking him to do something different here that we know maybe we have good confidence that he can do it, but are we sure that it is something that he really can switch and do it when he comes here? And I think that's a very important piece.
Okay, so if I were Maresca, I think I would look at this situation and I think I maybe want to use Nkunku then.
Yes.
Have Nkunku and Jackson kind of interchanging between that centre forward spot and the left wing spot, because he has done this before, and maybe even drop, rather than having a 4-2-3-1, have 3 midfielders behind. That would be a way of addressing this.
Yeah, so he is another of all the cast of characters they have in the attack. I think he's another one that's very high, one of the elite pressing attackers in the league. So those 2, Jackson and Nkunku. I think that you could do that. You could also go in a way where there be certain games that you want to use those 2. There may be other games at home where you feel you are so much better than the opponent that you could get through even with a subpar press.
Okay, so one question I wanted to ask you about this is that what we're saying basically is we've seen these guys press, and so maybe we would trust these guys to press, Nkunku, Jackson. Is there any evidence that players can really change their spots in this way? Because, generally speaking, we tend to assume kind of players are what they are. Is that true even when it comes to stuff like this?
For the most part, I think it depends on, there are a lot of factors here, some being the coach and their trajectory and where in the career they are. If it is younger, just coming into the first team, there is still probably some ways where you could teach them, and a lot of it depends on the profile of the coach and how he can convince the players to do things he wants them to do. I think this is where maybe the top 1% of coaches make a little bit of a difference in terms of, let's say take for example Pep. If Pep asks someone to press or do something that they're not used to doing, I think the player would try to do it. I'm not going to say that every coach can get the same response from the players, but there is also a limit to it. I think once players are fully, I would say, like when they are 24, 25, I feel like at that point it's going to be an uphill battle to change how their tendencies are, to especially things like, the most talked about and always discussed about thing is about how does the player react when the player loses a ball, or how does the player react when the team loses possession and now they have to recover into a defensive shape. So those are the things that for a lot of, like, especially the attacking players, that are seen as the differences between a player that is an elite player versus someone that's very good player. So I think to short answer to question is that I think it depends is the shortest answer, but I think it's a more nuanced answer is I think the younger the player, I think there is a little bit more runway to change some of their tendencies. But as they get into the prime age and beyond, I think it's harder to make meaningful changes.
Okay, so Madueke maybe at 22, it might be possible to get some more of this stuff out of him than maybe Neto and Felix, who are kind of closing in on 25.
Yeah, I think we've seen enough of Felix. I don't think this aspect of his game is going to change much. The out of possession aspect of his game is not going to change much. I think that was and that's going to be the reason why he hasn't really kicked on so far as a starter at like a Champions League title challenging club. And I think that's who he is. I don't think that's going to change much. Whereas Madueke, I think even last year, Madueke had better numbers in terms of pressing, different system, different coach, but he was definitely better than what he is this year.
So
there is hope there.
Yeah. So what I'm intrigued to see with them is what happens when they come up against a side that hold the ball but don't maybe shoot themselves in the foot. I mean, Chelsea had less of the ball against West Ham and Brighton, but when they got it, they were able to cut through them so easily because there was kind of a lot of space to exploit. But it'll be interesting when a team just has the ball against Chelsea. I know we've talked about this. We talked about this with City. We actually talked about this with Dortmund as well. Whether Chelsea can go and assert themselves in a game like that, especially if they have Jackson out or Nkunku out. It'll be intriguing to see the next step, which is like, how do Chelsea impose the structure of game they want on matches? Because right now it does feel a little bit like you don't really see that when you watch Chelsea. What you see is a team that's like, we've got the ball, let's give it to Palmer, something will happen, Jackson's running, and then magic will occur. And that has happened, I guess.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think when they go up against, I think they played City the first weekend, so maybe maybe we can't really. It's the first match of the season, first match for Enzo Maresca. But if they come up against Liverpool or Arsenal in the rest of as we go through the fixtures, it'll be interesting to see how they will try to solve that. That'll be those are going to be big problems. I think big challenges for them to solve.
Okay, so on the topic of squad construction, let's move on to Manchester City. They've had a very busy week. Obviously, the outcome of one of their legal battles, one of their many legal battles, but also the departure of Txiki Begiristain, who joined in 2012 as their director of football, came in from Barcelona. He was obviously hired for his expertise, but he was also a part of a long-term plan to woo Pep, I think. And he'd apparently planned to retire this summer when he turned 60, but decided to stay for another year to work with Pep. Pep's contract obviously up next summer as well, so maybe there's a little clue in there. I wanted to get a sense from somebody who's worked in the back room of a successful football club, Ravi. How do you assess his work from the outside over this last decade or so?
I mean, it's been like they are judged by the titles they win and the silverware, and I think there is no doubt that they've and obviously what that means, that's the highest level, and then you go back like how does that happen? Hiring good coaches. Well, he only had to hire one. No, he actually hired two. And both were pretty successful. And then signing good players. So I think obviously they had like sort of unlimited money, so they were able to sign good players. But if you think about it, like in the beginning, before Txiki came on, they were throwing silly money at sort of above average type players. Part of it was maybe also that they couldn't get the better players to come join the project yet. But yeah, so I think, since Txiki has come on, I think they've hardly had any major failures. I would say maybe, I guess, Calvin Phillips recently. That's the one name that comes to my mind. But overall, just just really been very steady, and you never hear his name, right? That's another thing about him, is like he's behind the scenes, and part of it is also because it's a unique setup where Pep while he's just a head coach, I think he has a lot of say in the players the team signs. I don't think Txiki signs any player that Pep says, I'm not sure about him. I don't think Txiki would ever go ahead and sign player. So yeah, from that perspective, Pep's in the limelight all the time, and Txiki's done a lot of work behind the scenes. Now, one thing that I don't know how much to attribute his involvement or his influence is all the structure they built in the back behind, like the first team staff, like the academy, the analysis departments, the whole infrastructure, the training ground, and the new training ground, like extension to the training ground, like all of that. Surely he has a hand in it. I don't know, obviously, how much it is, but between him and the CEO, Ferran Soriano, they've done a really good job of using the resources they were given to build this empire that is the City Football Group. So a lot of credit has to go to them, to both of them. But I think even before they signed Pep, like they got Pellegrini, and Pellegrini played good football, and they won a title with him in a Premier League title. So honestly, I think it's going to be a big loss for City Football Group. I tried to look for what are the other names that could come in and take the job, or like that could replace him. It's really hard to find a name that would be like, oh, that's a good name. And there's probably, now you're looking at two things. One is, are there any names that would keep Pep in the job? That's one. Or are there any names that is going to be as good as him? Like maybe those two lists are slightly different, or, because I think Txiki was fine letting Pep take all the limelight, and him operate in the background. And that's how it was in Barcelona too. I think you hear his name every now and then, but you don't really, like, it's not in the headlines constantly.
Sure.
So who is that another candidate that can do an equally good job and take the step back and stay behind the scenes? That's going to be one. I've read some rumors about Hugo Viana, the former Portuguese player, who's done a good job at Sporting, but I don't know if that how true that is. That he's kind of a serious candidate, and if it is, will he be able to keep Pep in the job? Pep continue for maybe a season or two more. So yeah, it's a big moment for them. I guess there is also the cynical view of this that, well, he knows that they're going to get fined, so he's leaving now, because the judgment for the 115 breaches, violations is due January of 25 or somewhere thereabouts. So he's leaving now because he knows that something is coming down the line. I don't know how much I believe it. I think that, if we believe that, there is really no point of this discussion. I think we should just say, let's say that's not the case, and then we can talk about their achievements. And I think that it's, pretty mind-boggling. Like, they've achieved something that I think the only thing they would say is, they should have maybe won a couple more Champions Leagues, but then you're dealing with Real Madrid. So it's hard to...
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard to kind of, win in that competition. But I think that it's a huge loss. I think City could look so different come next August if both Pep and Txiki are not there anymore.
Yeah, that's quite an ominous prospect, especially if they get a very severe punishment. The other name, as well as Hugo Viana, is Quique Carcel, that's also ominous, that name. He performs this role for Girona, who are obviously a City Football Group club, so there would be some continuity there. What I wanted to ask you, though, Ravi, is, again, as somebody who's worked in this arena, how is your work in the back room affected by having a really good person at the top of the tree or having a really bad person at the top of the tree? Like, how does that trickle down?
Well, I think the good ones always, they will help you where you need and get out of the way for you to do your job. And there will be free flow of information. among the people that are, let's say we're talking about recruitment, there is not silos in the group, in the club, and there's always like open lines of communication, and they want people, experts, they hire experts and let them do their job. That's what the best ones operate. I was lucky to work with someone like that, and that puts a lot of like responsibility on you and ownership. And that's always a good thing in places like football clubs, where sometimes there's another type of leadership or management where you're managing by manipulating who gets which piece of information. That's where you create these different silos in the organization, and you share certain information only with certain groups, and you are better. You're doing your job better than the others because you have access to some information they don't have, which is never healthy when you're all working for the same entity. So I think the good ones really would take a step back and let you shine with what you're good at, and they will come in and give direction where needed. They'll set the tone at the beginning, and then they'll let you do your job. So I would say that would be how a good organization or good way it'll impact you if working inside different departments: analysis, recruitment, sports science, all of them. And on the flip side, if there is this silo-based management, then it gets like very gossipy and very politicky, which I think, football clubs as an organization are not that big. Like, I worked at Microsoft, where there are literally 100,000 employees, and I worked in a group where there were 7,000 people in the entire organization, the group itself, and which was 2 buildings of 20 floors. So like it's like, and the football club would be like 50 people, first team. And, like maybe if you add the first team academy, maybe the biggest clubs would get to like 75 or something like that, but not beyond that. So there is no need for that much of like, silos, or it just makes it very inefficient. So I think the good ones, I bet there is definitely a lot of the good things at the City Football Group. I know that the group has grown very big now, because they have, I think, last time I counted was like 11 or 12 clubs in total. And so the organization has grown a lot. So surely there's a lot more process and more corporate structure. But Txiki and Ferran, they've built it from when they started. I think it was just Man City, right? Probably back in 2012. I don't think they had sister clubs around the world. So, or maybe they had 1 or 2 some agreements, but now they operate more than 10 clubs.
Yeah. So should we expect the next director of football at Manchester City to potentially be more powerful within the organization if Pep is going to leave? Pep is probably going to leave during that person's tenure, if not right at the beginning. And Pep presumably gets much more of a say than the average manager would get at City because he's Pep. Does this mean the next person is more likely to be more hands-on in squad building?
It's probably. I think it's more likely that, because it's very less likely you're going to find a coach that's going to get the credibility and the cachet of Pep right from the get-go. It could be someone that might grow into that over the years, but not from year one. So the sporting director or director of football, he will have to hire the new coach, I would think. And then, I think how they operate will change, if not significantly, but at least you will see a difference.
That is an enormous amount of power to give an incoming director of football to also choose the next coach if Pep's going to depart. That's gamble.
That's like and so this is where maybe what they might do is they might convince Pep to stay another year or 2 because Txiki is leaving, and so that Pep will have a say in who is going to come in and can transfer and build some of the, like, whatever Pep has been doing. Maybe it's not a transfer of power by any means, but more sort of get the other person up to speed before Pep leaves, instead of both leaving at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a
Organizations
lot of
do
sense.
this a lot. There's a lot of organizational intel and how a lot of the automatic things that have been built over the years that they will all be gone in one go. That is very difficult to replace. It'll be chaos
Sure.
for a bit. So, but that said, like obviously Pep, we don't know this, but Pep may not really be that much dialed in with what happens in the organization. He may just be, Txiki, I need this player, or Txiki, we need. They probably have regular meetings, and I read somewhere that they meet and chat every day during breakfast. Maybe that's where they talk about Txiki. All good. Maybe we're thinking about this player or that player or this position, and that's probably what he's been doing. And he might not really have that much of visibility or interest or say in the rest of the organization too. So it all depends.
Well, one way or another, we're going to get a different Manchester City next year. How different remains to be seen. I think we've just got time for one small thing before we go. Paul Pogba had his ban reduced, I believe this week, which means that he's eligible to go back and start playing again. I think at the moment he's negotiating release from his contract at Juventus so that he can find somebody else. He's 31 years old. I think it's probably fair to assume that he's still an outstanding creative passer and probably a decent long-range shooter. Do you have a sense of where he might end up? What club might be a good landing spot for him?
It's very difficult to say. It's very early. I mean, the last time he played a full season, by full season, I mean playing like 30 matches, is back 18-19 at United. And since then, he's played at Juve. He's been very injury prone. And he had the meniscus surgery I was talking about earlier. He had one of those at Juve. But he hasn't played since then. So since that surgery, I don't think he played many matches. So it's not like that's going to be a reason why you sign or not sign him. But yeah, I think data of that season, even in 21-22, that was the last season he played like a meaningful minutes, let's say about 1,000 minutes or so at United. The data looks pretty good, like attacking number 8 that can, or even like a more advanced midfielder. He can do a really good job at a high level. I guess the big question is, where is his fitness and like how much of it he can recover? Like he was a physical specimen at his peak, or even towards the end, he was pretty you could not miss him on the field when he's playing and when he's on the ball. I think he was very that type of a player. So it all depends on how long it'll take for him to get into playing shape. And I think it's good for him that he's going to be eligible to start training around January or something, or around that range. So that means that even if he were to find, let's say he finds a team in Europe, he will have that half season. I would think is more of him trying to like feel like a footballer again, and get into his groove, and get to a point. And then the summer preseason is going to be the big thing for him to, by end of that summer preseason, I think he can be in a really, really good place. Probably the best he can be at this stage. So it's hard to, someone like, I don't know, a lower level team could take a chance on him in Europe. I mean, obviously, the easy answer has been everybody linking him to MLS, not only because it's like, oh, MLS because it's little less demanding, but also that MLS season starts in March of 25.
Sure.
So their preseason starts in January. So there is definitely something there. Now, I think for MLS teams, the risk here is that they also don't know what shape he's in. I don't know how open he will be to take like a prove it contract, meaning that, hey, the first season or first 6 months, I'm going to probably take an incentive laden contract, not take up a DP spot in for MLS teams, not take up one of the designated player spots. And he can kind of come in and maybe get like somewhere around 1 million or something like that, and play through, and then have options in the contract where in year 2 he can get a designated player contract where he get a bigger payday. I don't know how open he's going to be to something of that nature. That would make it him attractive to a lot of MLS teams, I would think. Within Europe, I think it's really hard to. It's probably going to be some desperate team taking a flyer on, hey, we could get something out. If we get something out of him, it's a bonus. Otherwise, it's whatever. Like it's a risk like that. I think is probably the one that's going to happen. What do you think?
Well, the thing is, I mean, I was thinking, okay, what's a team that currently could do with some creativity in a workman-like midfield? And I thought, Juventus. No, I honestly don't know, because I mean, the thing is with Pogba, what's restricted his options previously has been his insane wage demands, and now coming out of this, he has a strong incentive to lower those wage demands. Well, if he's willing to drop them down considerably, then I think there are plenty of clubs who might get interested. I think ambitious upper mid-table Premier League clubs might think about him. And I could certainly see one of the Italian side, because the Italian clubs seem to operate quite strongly on nostalgia. You know, like you look at Inter's window this summer, and it's like, here's a guy whose name we know. Here's a guy who was good 5 years ago. You know, you can kind of see an Inter Milan or somebody saying, well, we'll get some value out of Pogba. We've made use of other people's cast-offs before. But I've got to say, there's not particularly obvious home for him now, unless you are willing to play him kind of, as you said, like almost as a 10, because I don't trust it. I didn't really trust his legs to kind of cover in defense 5 years ago. I certainly don't trust them now. So that's my worry. I do wonder if MLS just like ticks all the boxes, because he probably gets better pay there. It probably shows the best of his ability and limits kind of his worst features. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he would play as a 10, I think, in MLS. Like if you put him as a 10 and put a couple of workers, or at least one worker and another two-way player behind him, I think that would be a great midfield. Assuming that, like, he was very injury prone the last 2 seasons. If you look at his, and I think that meniscus surgery was a big thing too, like to remove that meniscus, and then now I would think that solves that problem, but obviously he probably hasn't trained like a footballer in such a long time, and that's gonna. And sometimes you'll be surprised how quickly they can get into shape, but also sometimes you won't be surprised at all that they're totally out of shape. So it's a lot of it is individual based and how they've taken care of themselves without any monitoring. So I don't know with Paul Pogba how things are on that front. Yeah, it's I think maybe like it's not like in NFL what they do before the draft is they do these pro days, or like where the players show off what they can do, like, you know, quarterbacks. I think especially for quarterbacks they do that. Obviously football has nothing like that, but I wonder, like, if he really wants to get a really big contract at a big team, and he's confident about his shape and where he is, then maybe he has to show that. Now, a way to show that would be to take a small contract for maybe the half season let's say he can start playing in March. He signs with the team in January, trains with them a couple months, and then starts playing for them in March. And then summer he's out. Or he does the same with an MLS team, although MLS teams would want him to commit at least till the end of the season. So yeah, I think there will be some options, but it is too early to say like which will be a good landing spot for him.
Well, if you watching or listening to this at home have a suggestion for where Paul Pogba could end up, then do let us know, and maybe we can talk about it, and we'll see if anything happens over this international break. Thank you very much for listening or watching today. If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Follow the Transfer Flow on social media and make sure that you're subscribed to the newsletter for in-depth coverage of football from all over Europe. Thank you very, very much, and we will catch you next time. It was good to talk to you, as always, Ravi. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, great to chat with you, Patrick, as always.